for joining us. Thank you, Casey Gray, and Jeanette and Mark and Jeanette and the other Jeanette, Jeanette Squared, for putting together today's program about helping us to understand evaluation and LI Squared. And we are happy to have our guests from Mathematica and Michelle Dare here to walk us through what they've learned. And I will turn this over to Jeanette. Thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate all the commitment that you have given to the TLC and to your program improvements. Jeanette?
All right, thanks, Lisa. So I am going to very briefly introduce our panelists for today. I'm also going to offer the group some questions to reflect on as you listen to the panelists. So the reason that we're giving you these questions to think about is because we're going to spend about 30 minutes with our panelists just presenting, telling us about the great work that they did under Project Spark. Then for the next 30 minutes, we're going to go into sort of 2 breakout rooms, one focused on technology changes, one focused on supporting staff mental health during the pandemic. And then you're going to be able to choose which breakout room you go to. And after that, we're going to go to site team specific breakout rooms for some team time, so to kind of debrief on those. So we want to make sure you are reflecting on what the panelists are sharing so that you're ready to jump into the conversation in those breakout rooms. So for our panelists, first we have Diana McCallum of Mathematica. She is the Project Spark Director. She's going to MC the panel. Next we have Michelle Dare of the Adjacent Possible. Michelle is the Principal Investigator for Project Spark. And of course, we have our brilliant program leaders with us who will talk about how they led their programs through the pandemic. Andrea Barnum is the Workforce Programs Manager at Arapahoe Douglas Works, which for those of you who don't know where that is, it's near Denver, serving Arapahoe and Douglas counties. Katani Kwaman is the Director of Workforce Operations for Philadelphia Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So as you're listening to folks today, please reflect on your own experiences in your respective programs during the pandemic. We'll spend time in breakout rooms discussing these after the panel is over, like I mentioned. So jot down any notes that you might find helpful, things that spark your ideas, things that maybe trigger some positive or not so positive memories for you from your work during the pandemic. As you listen, just think about what COVID-related technology innovations did your program implement that you're most proud of? What strategies did you tap into to support the well-being of your staff during the pandemic? How did you support participants' well-being? And last, what are the innovations in each area that you're hoping to make permanent? Or maybe you already have made some permanent. And which of those have just become business as usual at this point? You can't imagine going back. And why those? So I'm going to now pass it to Diana McCallum to kick off our panel.
All right. Thanks, Jeanette. Welcome, everyone. I'm Diana McCallum, and as Jeanette said, I'm Project Director for Spark. I'm at Mathematica and Director of Children, Youth, and Families work. So Project Spark, which I had the pleasure of joining a few months ago and working with Michelle and John here. But Project Spark stands for Supporting Partnerships to Advance Research and Knowledge. And it's funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Administration for Children and Families. So this work, it really is a big partnership for us. Michelle previously led the project and is now at the Adjacent Possible and leading as our principal investigator, but she and John McKay were the ones that led the 2 briefs that are available that we'll be focusing on today. The vision for the project overall has been to spark innovation and think about collaborative partnerships when it comes to improving programs and, ultimately outcomes for children and families. And with the project, we set out to create a series of products, and these two that we're going to focus on today just really centered on two critical areas that human services agencies were facing and had shared back with the project team. So that's how we landed on adapting with technology and thinking about the mental health and wellness sets of issues that agencies were grappling with and the ways that they were doing that internally and then for the families that they served. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Michelle to jump into the highlights.
Great. So thanks, Diana. So grateful for your partnership and all this work for sure. And thanks to everybody out there. And we're really excited today to share with you some of the things that you said. We're bringing research and evidence back to you of the things that you shared with us in a lot of ways. So today, what you can expect is some highlights on, as Diana mentioned, on technology and then also on strategies for promoting well-being and reducing stress. We're, going to bring in some voices from the field. As we mentioned, we've got Andrea and Katani who are going to share with us their experience doing it. And then we also want to learn from you both in the chat. We're going to ask you to share your ideas and experiences in the chat. And then also, in the breakout room. So we'll have plenty of opportunities to kind of share idea, inspire, and support each other in this work. So I just want to kind of give you guys a little bit of background about kind of how the data came about. When the pandemic hit, all of us were so shocked and surprised. And the first inclination for everybody in kind of my world, in the research world, was to push out resources to people and to organize webinars. And that was our initial reaction is, how can we just make sure that we support people like you who are in the trenches doing the work and having this, huge disruption, and families that are experiencing this huge disruption. And so, what we did was, instead of kind of pushing out resources, we stopped and paused and said, let's do what we do best. And that's learn, innovate, and improve. And I love Lisa's, mention of that in her remarks to, say, because this really was about LI squared. So we slowed down. We didn't go slow. We definitely just paused and we said, let's organize a set of learn and innovate learn sessions to figure out what you all need and then how to support you in that work. So we went to Project Improve, our project officer, Damon Waters, and Lisa Washington Thomas, who was also at that time when we came out with this idea and said, we just want to do an LI squared session. We want to do a learning session and so we organized 4 of them. And we had about 80 people join, and we had over 500 sticky notes. We did a series of 4 different mural sessions. I'm sure you guys know what that is by now. And also Spark joined as part of that too, administration on the OPRE side. And so between the 2 organizations that support both research and practice, we held these sessions and we learned from you what you needed. And as a result of that, and then we held some Innovate sessions immediately after that. So we organized what was called EPIC, or Equip and Practice in Community. And some of the things that you told us during that initial session and ongoing throughout the EPIC work, I'll share throughout. But really, that's where our data came from. What you told us is that what you needed was connection. And so we organized these virtual learning community groups across the country. And we asked people to sign up. And so we organized in all over about 100 groups. We organized about 50 some odd groups, and we had we sat as flies on the wall, and listened. And we had people from Mathematica taking notes and cataloging notes, and we recorded what you said. So we were kind of just gathering that information. So we used that information from those groups. And they represented, we invited everybody, but we represented, about six different states. So we got that data. And then we also, at one point in there, we said under Project Spark, we said, what we really should do is take this EPIC community and, and this EPIC community grew and grew and grew. And we said, let's survey them. And we'll also open it up in partnership with APHSA and get the survey out to get a pulse check again, to learn yet again how you're adapting and how you're coping through the pandemic, how you're innovating as well. And then we did a third kind of data collection source, and that is we provided individualized technical support, deeper technical assistance through the pandemic to about 16 different sites between Improve and Spark. And we listened to your stories, we saw your innovations, we took part in your innovations, we helped you test your innovations, and we learned from and with you in that. So the remarks I'm going to share today, and Diana will chime in on this, is really from this epic work that you all initiated and created. By the time that we finished, we started with we just reached out to our Improve and Spark sites initially, and by the time we finished, we had close to 400 people as part of that epic community. So that's kind of how it got started, and that's the data we collected. So it was very grassroots. It was super unplanned, just like the pandemic. But we took advantage of listening to you all and recording your stories. So what did we learn? So I'm going to share a little bit about the technology and service innovations and TANF programs. And then we're going to pause and then hear from Andrea about real life experiences. So, how you adapted and others across the country adapted really was through these, you were forced to essentially figure it out. Many of you didn't even have laptops. You had, computers, and it was a crazy, chaotic time. But you adapted in really innovative ways. And so all the things that you were doing kind of in the office, you figured out how to do virtually. That included coaching, it included case management, and it included really being creative about using online kind of training and employment programs through online platforms like Coursera and some others that came about. You also did kind of innovative things and figured out technology by looking at, figuring out how to record personalized videos and texting them to your customers. Texting became a huge kind of new resource that you used. Before there was a caution about texting, and all of a sudden, all the cautions were thrown out in a lot of ways, where you really just had to get innovative in order to connect to people. And then, figuring out how to take things that used to require a wet signature and now make them online, and now make them and convert them to faster, easier to use, electronically approved documents that business has been using for decades. And really figuring out how to use those kinds of resources in human services and workforce programs is really what you did. So there was also this big push around the bridging the digital divide. I mean, I think if anything, the pandemic showed us, how important it is to have access to technology, and yet how many families that are living in conditions of poverty lack these access to these resources. And it not only affects their ability to connect to jobs and work and school, to connect to work and school opportunities, but also for their kids. So programs like you leaned in and figured out, how do we get, technology and resources for customers. So about a third, little less than a third from the surveys that we got, said that they offered laptops or other kinds of computers for participants. They also offered tech trainings for participants to improve that digital literacy. And then, about almost a quarter said that you purchased, new technology. The reality of what we learned in this is, we often talk about supportive services like childcare and transportation, but the reality of it is computer and access to broadband is now becoming the new supportive service. And yet there were very few resources to pay for these. Most programs had to use their own funding to figure it out. And as I mentioned, many states now are going to being able to text message clients, across the board and push out announcements, push out opportunities, and just even encouraging messages as well. And then the third area that you really kind of innovated around was really reframing participant engagement and accountability. OFA didn't repeal the work participation rate, but, what ended up happening is the reality of it is, the world had changed. And so you had to think about a different way to engage customers, without these kind of sticks of sanctions, because most of the states really granted good cause exemptions rather than sanctioning people. So instead of going from kind of an all or nothing approach and using sanctions, the really focus became starting with something and figuring out what people can do and experimenting with different messaging and participants, and then continue to track for, and offering flexibility for hours and activities. And then really thinking about what can a person do and setting them up for success rather than creating a bar that they can never reach. So with that, what I'd love to do is kick it over to Andrea, who's going to fill us in a little bit more about her experience in Arapahoe at AD Works.
Thank you,
I'll stop
Michelle.
sharing my screen, Andrea.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to take a few minutes to speak about a couple of things that we've done at our agency to adapt to COVID and support our TANF job seekers. We knew that we had some digital literacy gaps with our participants, but COVID obviously amplified that digital divide tenfold. We had TANF participants that wanted to work virtually but didn't know how. We had participants that knew how but didn't have access to technology. We had participants that were home with their kiddos, sharing their devices, not having enough devices for virtual learning and job search. And then we had participants with really a combination of needs. And bottom line, we saw that most of our TANF participants didn't have access to computers and or the internet, and even if they did, they didn't have the adequate technical know-how to use applications that are really foundational to enter the job market, to engage in virtual trainings, and to truly engage in their community virtually. As a result of this, our business services team worked with a local community college in our area, is Arapahoe Community College, to create a hands-on training for our workforce participants. We collaborated with DVR and came up with this virtual work readiness course. It really focused on two things: basic computer skills, which was about 42 hours, and virtual work readiness skills, which was about 8 hours, so 50 hours total. We included software and a laptop for participants to keep. It wasn't a loaner. They were able to keep the software and laptops that they received in the course and used in the course. The course was provided in person or virtually, and included a hybrid option as well, depending on really the comfort level of the participant and what they wanted. We originally funded it through CARES. Now it's funded through ARPA and TANF workforce funds. And since November of 2020, we've had approximately 77 customers, our agency, successfully complete the training and receive a laptop and software package. We currently have a cohort of, I think I heard yesterday, 16 going on right now. That one started yesterday, and another cohort of 18 starting next month. We kind of picked up momentum, oddly enough, that in this year we've picked up quite a few. And in this process, we've learned a few things. So going back to that learn, innovate, and improve, which became my mantra in COVID constantly. So instruction is best done in person. We realized that. I know it sounds funny since we're trying to teach digital literacy, but in-person learning was the most successful for our participants. We learned to use laptops weekly in the classrooms, but don't officially release them to customers until the end of the training. It was kind of this reward for them. They participated better and completed the training better when they waited to get the laptop until the end. We chose our locations wisely based on where customers were located. We're over several counties, and the counties are quite large. So we wanted to make sure that those in-person courses were offered and accessible to participants where they needed them. And then we combine what they've learned, make sure that you combine what you learn with the practical application. So we followed up with participants, encouraged them to build upon the skills that they learned in the intensive case management they received with their workforce specialists. And afterwards, we surveyed participants to see, did the training and instruction, was it helpful for their job search and for actually securing virtual work in some way? And then best practice, like having staff go through the training so that they can speak about what to expect and get testimonials from participants about how it helps them the most. And that really is what sold it to additional participants. And I feel like why we're getting a lot more participants now is because we have so many success stories that we can lean on, which really helps sell that. And then if we had participants that had the foundational skills but just lacked access to technology, we looked at utilizing our supportive services funding to issue technology directly on the EBT cards, on the benefit cards. And so to date, we've issued funds for computers, laptops, tablets, software, printer ink, paper. We did GPS for a participant in CDL training and internet. And all of that really resulted in access to technology for customers in their household, which really follows that 2-gen approach, impacting not just the participant, but really the whole family. And the biggest result for us was engagement increased because they had the right tools for themselves. So those are just a couple of the things that we've done at Arapahoe Douglas Works, and they really coincide with that data dive that you referenced earlier, Michelle. But that's it for now. Thanks, Michelle.
All right.
All right, thanks. Go ahead.
Sure. I was going to say we may have time for maybe 1 or 2 comments before we move on, but I think, Jeanette had some questions in the chat that we just wanted to reflect on, and maybe you all can enter them into the chat as you've thought of them, but are there any COVID-related technology innovations that you're most proud of or that you had used? It'd be helpful to kind of see the range of those. And I know we are pressed for time, so maybe folks can enter them into the chat, but Michelle, you might want to go on to the next brief.
That's good. So go ahead and enter in the chat and you can pick them up. We can pick them up in the discussion, but I just want to, and I'll go quickly through this. So what we want to talk about today is a little bit the second brief itself. And when I mentioned that we had those listen to learn sessions, we actually had a learn again session, and we were continually learning and listening to you. And each time we heard the same story, and that is that you're stressed. And the reality of it is we have been living in, during the middle of a pandemic for 2 years. And it literally has been this collective stress that all of us are feeling, whether you're feeling the stress of moving from going virtual to it, and going from, in the office to at home, and then figuring out how to maybe re-enter. We've also had this kind of sense of uncertainty as well. When we went to the surveys, what we found was about 62% of respondents said they felt confident in the way that in their ability to handle personal problems. Fewer than half said that they felt like things were going their way, and about half said that they felt like they were unable to control the important things in their life. Some of their top concerns, obviously, were safety of family and friends, managing work and family life, and effectively serving customers remotely. It's interesting because looking back on where we were a year ago, there was a sense of hope. We're possibly coming out. We had the vaccination, and we were coming out of this. And I think the other part of this whole story, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is some of the racial violence and that this country has experienced as well, and that created an added layer of stress for a lot of people. And so this managing of the pandemic, the sense of hope, then Delta, then hope extinguished, and then Omicron, and then back to some degree of normal. And now we're all ready to kind of get back to whatever the new normal is, but we're a little skittish. It's just been a lot. And so we're at this point now where it's, it's often, it's beyond stress, it's exhaustion, it's grief, and it's trauma from these past 2 years. Still, what we've also seen is this tremendous amount of creativity and resilience and grit. Program leaders across the country, many of you have really leaned in and saw this as an opportunity to pause and to reflect and to meet the needs of their staff and of participants. So how did you respond? People across the country respond in this. Here's some of the ways that they adapted. They created flexibility with appointments and work schedules to accommodate for the family needs. By providing a safe environment so those who needed to show up for work could do so without feeling like they were jeopardizing their health and the health of their family members. Programs have also prioritized self-care, time for mindfulness at work and at home. And as I mentioned, part of that EPIC community, we created a series of 20-minute videos. They said, we don't want long webinars. We want 20-minute short webinars, videos. We created under Project Improve about almost 150 20-minute videos, including 85 live sessions of mindfulness from a great mindfulness instructor between April 2020 and January 2022. Well, when we last checked, there were over 850 views of just the stress and wellness videos alone. The other ways that you've adapted are really instituting a supervision practice. Michigan Works Great Lakes Bay is one example. They have regular check-ins with staff to help them set their personal and professional goals throughout the pandemic. And this reportedly benefited both the supervisors and the staff. As one staff member, oh, whoops, I'm sitting here sharing the slides. Diana just let me know I'm not sharing my screen. There you go. Sorry about that. There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks for that nudge, Diana. That's what stress will do to you. Don't even realize you're not sharing.
I was intently listening, and yes.
I know, you're so good. This is the slide that you missed. We'll make sure you get these slides out later to reduce stress and well-being. You can see that very quickly. Creating flexibility, prioritizing self-care, and providing a safe environment. Those are some of the things that we recorded from the sites with which we worked and gathered information from. And this next part is really thinking about how do we support staff better. And that's where I was telling you with Michigan Works Great Lakes Bay, one staff member shared about their supervision practice. I left empowered. We're all learning together. A supervisor shared. In meetings before, it was about putting out the current fire. Now we're getting to know and trust one another. And when I hear and read those words, it just sent chills through my spine. You know, it's just like, this is one of the benefits of being innovative and creative and slowing down and recognizing what people need at this time that could continue beyond this time. One of my other favorites was actually from Katani's neighborhood. It was one of the programs in her area in Philadelphia. They held a Zoom karaoke session, and which brought both, you know, fun and laughter during very stressful times. And then, you know, the other thing is that programs are beginning to have very honest conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Massachusetts Department of Transitional Assistance created a formal position to improve DEI practices, and others are exploring similar adaptations to program services and policies to address inequalities. And, you know, these are important steps. We don't want this to just be kind of a fad thing. We want this to be something that's lasting. And how do we continue these practices, both on the stress and wellness side, as well as on the DEI side? They're both very much interrelated, so that we can emerge from this pandemic better off. We want these conversations to continue. These past 2 years have really been hard. Believe me, we've all experienced it. And yet there's been opportunities to reflect and refocus on truly what matters, people, relationships, and really finding grace in the struggle. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Katani, and she can share her experience in Philadelphia.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for having me to just talk briefly about some of our experiences navigating the pandemic and supporting, you know, a system. First, I want to, you know, shout out Mathematica for being a space for practitioners to come and sort of exhale, where we didn't have the capacity or even think to host communities of learning and reflection and sort of peer learning and reliance. They created that space. So I'm very thankful to be a part of it and, you know, also share on how some of that have impacted us. I just wanted to, in thinking about this topic of like mental health, stress management, and, you know, what's like to sort of lead in this era, it was very, I was sort of like thinking about how we navigated the uncertainty during the height of the pandemic, and feeling the intense burden of supporting staff and a system that will be impacted by decisions you make. And so we have responsibilities, and that sort of burden was something that was very difficult to hold, but also it's ripe with tension. You know, we want to be able to say, you know, relax, take it easy, take 2 months off. but there's a system to manage and to push forward and work to do. Our capacity to learn anything new or innovative was sort of eclipsed and a struggle because people just needed help. And what do I do now? It's a pandemic. I've never heard, don't know how to do this. Where can I get support? And we were all sort of just like waiting to see what someone else did. Did it work? No? Okay, we'll go on to the next thing. And so, as stewards of public service, I recognize that the biggest sense of relief that we could get would ultimately come from our funders. They tell us what the requirements are. They tell us when it needs to go in. And so in essence, how much or little that we were able to be flexible was really dependent on what we were told. But even in that, the latitude that we did have, we were able to make some adjustments to account for managing stress, well-being, and flexibility, which was ultimately the theme of how we were trying to do things. One of the things that we sort of had to get in the habit of was ask for help. We were in a contract with Mathematica at the time, so we were able to say, this is what we've been doing for the last 2, 3, 4 years. How do we adapt and adjust and account for? It's ultimately, how do we set our goals rooted in the reality of what's happening? And having to accept that allowed us to make some changes that we were able to connect with customers on a real level. They're struggling with teaching their kids, so were our staff that are in the center at the front lines, trying to guide them in their employment and training goals. They were scared to go outside, so were the staff. We were all experiencing deeply what the pandemic was bringing. But one thing that sort of became quite a rude awakening is that though we were all deeply impacted by the pandemic, it did not affect us all equally. So our options were not the same. Learning and how to lead with this knowledge was also something we had to be very cognizant of, because just because you can get your groceries delivered when you want, it doesn't mean the others, customers or even staff were able to do the same thing. And so some points that conclusions I would say that would help me bring resolve is I have to sort of practice my own personal self-awareness. I'm very much a believer is that it's hard to lead people in a direction that you haven't gone yourself. So acknowledging where you are as a leader, as a practitioner, as a peer, and how you're struggling and maintaining in this process, because that is probably the most relatable thing or point of connection that your staff can take on or hear from you. We had to appeal and acknowledge the raw emotions that were causing stress. Sometimes people just didn't feel like working, and creating an environment where it's safe to say that, or I'm tired, or you know what, I just don't have it today. And understanding that was a very ever-present reality that many, again, at various levels, from the folks at our organization to the places that we funded, that was very real. And then I would recommend that you truly assess the culture of your work or your workspace. I think many organizations sort of pride ourselves in being able to understand what it means to be human-centered. You do the work. It's a word that's thrown around to know a place that's, promotes well-being. But how true is it really? Do we say that, take your time on this, but am I Teams messaging you every 10 minutes about an assignment that's due? There is an appearance of wellness and stress management and all that, and then there's the reality of secondhand stress is sort of what I call it. If this person is pushing this, how does that impact the culture of the workspace? What messages is it sending, and how does that impact our ability to really feel like this is a safe place to sort of navigate something completely foreign to us? And then there's the sort of the reality of just expecting what you have to do. You have to sort of accept the realities that we do have funders, we do have responsibilities. How do we know that we're stewards of public funds? There are things that we have to do. How do we accept that and move forward and make flexibilities where we do have that freedom? And then finally, again, it's just asking for help. There's moments where I had to repeatedly, out of curiosity, explore things because why not? It was a new environment, and none of us had done this before. And if there was ways that we can ask for flexibilities or a different way to do things, or question if can we scratch this year for data and start over in a year, or whatever, if our needs would be, asking for help when it was available. And of course, even if it didn't feel safe, I think it was always worth doing. So those have been my takeaways in like managing. And the fact is, it still continues. The pandemic has gone on for 2 years, and people are still just sort of accepting what it means to be back in the office. Like, it's really stressful for me to get on the train in the morning, and it didn't used to be. So it's an ever-going process that I would just, I would guess, encourage and even remind myself that we continuously have to be sensitive to as we move forward. So again, thanks for having me, and I'll take it back over to Michelle.
Thanks, Katani. Diana, do you want to pick it up?
Sure. And I think at this point, Jeanette, I don't know if there are introductions that you want to do to moving to the breakouts, but I think that's probably where we'll go next.
Yeah, I think Casey Gray is going to set up our 2 breakout rooms. Andrea and Diana are going to be in a breakout room focused on technology adaptations during COVID. And Katani and Michelle are going to be in a breakout room focused on supporting staff well-being. So select the breakout room that you are interested in, and get ready for a lively discussion with you all, the TLC, or be connected with one of the speakers that you heard today. That is definitely something that your coach can help you do. And if you feel like you just did not get enough time to talk about these topics with your fellow TLC sites today, please let your coach know. We want to make sure that these collective TA sessions are useful for you all. So if this is a conversation you want to continue, just let your coach know. And then Casey Gray has put in the chat a link to a very quick survey. We would love for all of the team members from each of the sites to take this survey. When I say quick, seriously, less than 5 minutes, super easy. It's just a great way to give us feedback about the session today. Casey Gray, Jeanette Hersick, or Lisa, is there anything that you want to add?
No, I think, Jeanette, you handled that with I was going to highlight the evaluation, so thank you.
All right. Well, thanks again so much, everyone. Have a great Tuesday, and we will see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.